Emma, Lily, Sarah, and Chloe thought it was just another fun sleepover at the Johnson family home. But by morning, 3 of them would never leave the house alive, and the quiet suburban street would become the scene of one of the most horrifying family massacres the town had ever seen. Emma, Lily, Sarah, and Chloe were inseparable. The kind of friends who shared every secret, every laugh, and every heartbreak. When the Johnson family invited them over for a Friday night sleepover, it felt like the perfect start to the weekend. The Johnsons lived in a quiet neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Families left their doors unlocked, neighbors waved from porches, and the streets stayed silent after dark. To the girls, it was safe, ordinary, and familiar. That night, the Johnson living room buzzed with energy. Pillows and blankets covered the floor, bags of chips and candy were scattered across the coffee table, and the sound of a movie played in the background, half ignored as the girls laughed louder than the dialogue. The Johnson parents peeked in once, smiling at the chaos, then retreated upstairs to bed. Their youngest son had already fallen asleep, unaware of the excitement unfolding just a few doors away. The night carried on with the kind of carefree joy only teenagers know. They told ghost stories, dared each other to eat spoonfuls of hot sauce, and scrolled through social media, gossiping about school. Every few minutes, one of them would laugh so hard that it echoed through the whole house. Nothing about the night seemed dangerous or out of place, but in hindsight, there were signs subtle, almost invisible, that something wasn't right. The family dog, usually calm, refused to settle down. He paced near the back door, barking into the dark yard, as if he sensed something lurking beyond the fence. Emma tried to laugh it off, tossing him a treat to distract him, but the barking continued. At one point, Sarah whispered that it was creepy, that maybe someone was outside. The others rolled their eyes and told her to stop being dramatic. After all, they were in a safe neighborhood. What could possibly go wrong? Neighbors later recalled seeing a shadowy figure moving along the sidewalk just after midnight. At the time, no one thought much of it. Teenagers often cut through the streets late at night, and it wasn't unusual to see someone out walking. But this figure didn't move with casual ease. He lingered. He stopped. He watched out inside. The girls carried on, unaware they were being observed. Chloe, restless and wide awake, grabbed her phone to scroll through TikTok, while the others settled into sleeping bags. The blue glow of the screen lit up her face in the dim room. Just outside, a pair of eyes studied the same light flickering through the curtains. It wasn't just a passerby. Someone was waiting by 1 o'clock in the morning. The laughter had faded into yawns. Half-empty soda cans stood forgotten on the coffee table. The living room had quieted, though none of the girls had completely fallen asleep. They whispered about crushes, complained about homework, and giggled about inside jokes. To them, the night still felt normal, but behind the normalcy, something was shifting. A light in the kitchen flickered once before going out. The air felt colder, though no windows were open. The family dog growled low, a sound that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She whispered that maybe they should wake up the parents, but Lily brushed it off. They were being silly, she said. It was probably nothing. The truth is, they weren't imagining it. The Johnson house was no longer theirs alone. Somewhere inside, footsteps moved softly, carefully, like someone determined not to be heard. The intruder had chosen this night, this house, and these victims with deliberate intent. The Johnson parents upstairs had no idea. They slept soundly, unaware their home had been invaded. Their son, in his room down the hall, shifted in his bed, turning over without waking. Only the girls downstairs remained restless, fidgeting under their blankets, unaware of how quickly the night was about to change. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder what would have happened if they had trusted their instincts. What if Sarah had convinced them to check on the strange noises? What if they had called the police when the dog wouldn't stop barking? Would it have made any difference? That's the chilling part of this story, how ordinary the beginning felt, how easily danger slipped past unnoticed. It's a reminder that tragedy often hides in plain sight, disguised as just another night. Do you ever check your doors and windows before going to bed? Or do you assume nothing bad could ever happen in your neighborhood? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story already has you hooked, make sure to like and subscribe, because the night has only just begun, and what comes next will change everything for the Johnson family forever. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the house fell into complete darkness. The television screen flickered once, and then shut off, plunging the living room into silence. At first, the girls thought it was just a blown fuse. Power outages weren't unusual, especially on windy nights, and they joked nervously about being stuck in the dark. But what no one realized was that the outage wasn't random. Someone had deliberately cut the power, and from that moment on, the Johnson family's night turned from ordinary to terrifying. Later, investigators would discover that the kitchen window had been pried open with a crowbar. Muddy footprints, half smudged, as if the intruder tried to wipe them away, led from the backyard into the heart of the home. Whoever entered didn't stumble inside by accident. He knew what he was doing. He had studied the house. He had been watching for weeks, maybe even months. The girls sat in the dark, whispering. One of them reached for her phone to use the flashlight, but as soon as the screen lit up, it vanished from her hand. Something had yanked it away in the blackness. At first, she thought it was a prank, one of the others trying to scare her. But then she heard the faint sound of breathing that didn't belong to any of them. Imagine being in that room. No lights, no phone, just shadows and silence. Would you have realized someone else was there? Would you have panicked, or would you have stayed frozen, hoping it was just your imagination? The intruder moved like a shadow himself, careful and methodical. He didn't rush. He didn't make mistakes. Police would later describe him as calculated, someone who had planned this night down to the smallest detail. The first step was control. Remove the power, take away light, and force his victims into fear. And it worked. The girls huddled together, whispering frantically, too afraid to move. Upstairs, the Johnson parents stirred. The sudden silence of the house woke Mrs. Johnson, who nudged her husband. They assumed it was a blown fuse as well, maybe a storm outside. Neither of them knew that someone was already moving quietly through the lower floor in the kitchen. Drawers were opened, not carelessly, but deliberately. A knife was taken, the largest one in the set. The evidence would later show fingerprints smeared across its handle, proof that it had been chosen carefully. Whoever held it had come prepared for violence. Back in the living room, the dog barked again, but this time it was different. His growl was deeper, more frantic. He wasn't barking at the backyard anymore. He was barking inside the house. The sound sent a ripple of dread through the room. Chloe whispered that they should go upstairs and wake her parents. But before anyone could move, a crash echoed from the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the powerless house, it sounded like an explosion. The girls froze. Every second felt stretched, like time itself was stalling. They could hear the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. Then nothing. The silence was worse than the noise. It was as if someone was standing just out of sight, listening, waiting. Think about it. What would you have done? Run for the door, screamed for help, or stayed hidden, hoping the danger would pass? Investigators later pieced together the sequence of events. The intruder had entered through the kitchen, tested the locks, and moved through the house like he had been there before. He avoided squeaky floorboards, stepped carefully around scattered shoes, and even bypassed the alarm system, as if he already knew how to disarm it. This wasn't random. This was personal. Downstairs, one of the girls finally worked up the courage to stand. She whispered that they should make a run for it, but just as she reached for the front door, it wouldn't budge. The lock had been jammed from the outside. Someone had prepared for their escape, making sure they had no way out. Upstairs, Mr. Johnson got out of bed and began walking toward the staircase. That's when the intruder made his move. He slipped past the living room, knife in hand, silent as he climbed the stairs. The girls, too afraid to follow, could only listen as the creak of the steps faded into the darkness. Moments later, muffled sounds carried down a thud, a gasp, and then silence again. The house was no longer a safe place. It had become a trap. Every exit blocked, every phone useless, and every second ticking closer to disaster. The power outage had done its job. The Johnson family and their guests were isolated, blind, and defenseless. The intruder was in complete control, and what he did next would shock the entire community and leave investigators asking one haunting question: why this family, and why that night? Do you always feel safe inside your home when the lights go out? Would you even consider that someone could be inside, waiting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story has you unsettled already, make sure to subscribe, because the nightmare inside the Johnson home is only beginning. The silence after the faint thud upstairs was unbearable. The girls sat frozen in the dark living room, straining to hear anything that might tell them what had just happened. Every breath felt too loud, every rustle of their blankets like a warning signal. None of them wanted to admit it out loud, but they all knew in that moment that someone was inside the house with them. The barking dog suddenly stopped, cut short in a way that made Emma's stomach twist. Something had happened to him, and now the only source of alarm in the house was gone. Later, investigators would describe the sequence of events as chillingly precise. The intruder had moved upstairs swiftly after silencing the dog, attacking the parents before they could react. There were no signs of a struggle loud enough for neighbors to hear, no broken furniture, no smashed glass. Everything had been quiet, deliberate, controlled. The killer's method seemed designed to avoid panic, to keep the rest of the household from realizing what was happening until it was far too late. Downstairs, the girls whispered frantically about whether to hide or run. Sarah suggested they squeeze into the closet beneath the stairs, but Chloe argued that hiding together would only make them easier to find. Emma wanted to reach the younger brother upstairs, but the thought of climbing those creaking steps in the dark made her freeze in place. Every option felt dangerous, and hesitation stretched into precious minutes of stillness. The living room felt smaller with every passing second. The shadows seemed to move with them, pressing in tighter. Then came the sound that would haunt them forever: slow, careful footsteps descending the stairs. Each creak echoed through the house, deliberate and unhurried. Whoever was coming down knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't rushing. They weren't worried. They were in control. The girls clutched at each other, their eyes wide even in the dark. The footsteps paused halfway down, as though the intruder was listening, savoring the fear below. The silence was worse than the sound. Then, after a few long breaths, the steps continued until they reached the bottom. The next part of the story is one that still divides investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike. The intruder walked straight past the living room. He didn't stop to attack the girls. He didn't even acknowledge them. Instead, he moved toward the kitchen again, dragging something heavy across the floor. What was it? A chair? A bag? No one knows for sure, but the scraping sound filled the silence like nails on glass. Some believe he was preparing something, maybe a barricade, maybe another trap. Upstairs, the younger brother stirred in his bed. He was too young to understand what was happening, but later, when police questioned him, he admitted that he heard the footsteps, the scraping, and even the muffled voices of his sister and her friends. For reasons still unexplained, the intruder never entered his room. He was left untouched, a silent witness to everything that unfolded. The decision to spare him has become one of the most haunting mysteries of this case. Was it mercy? A mistake? Or was it intentional? A cruel way to ensure there would always be someone left behind to remember. The girls downstairs didn't know what to do. They whispered about running again, about forcing the front door open no matter what. But before they could act, the sound of footsteps returned, moving quickly now, circling the house. The intruder knew where they were, knew they hadn't moved. Every second that passed made it harder to think clearly. Fear has a way of paralyzing, and that's exactly what it did to them. When police eventually entered the home, hours later, they described the living room as eerily untouched. Blankets were still spread across the floor, snack wrappers scattered, pillows piled in a corner. It looked like a normal sleepover, until you noticed the silence, the stillness that comes only after something terrible has happened. Theories about why the intruder bypassed the girls at first vary widely. Some investigators think he wanted to prolong their fear, using the silence and uncertainty as a weapon. Others argue he was waiting for the right moment, making sure the house was completely under his control before finishing what he started. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. The girls were trapped, terrified, and helpless, listening to their own doom approach, step by step. Imagine yourself in that living room. Could you have stayed quiet? Could you have forced yourself to move, to run, to fight? Or would fear have kept you frozen, just as it did for them? This chapter of the story is the darkest, because it's not just about violence, it's about anticipation, about the unbearable waiting that breaks a person long before the first blow ever lands. And that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. The Johnson house that night was not only a crime scene, it was a stage for psychological torture, and the intruder played his role with terrifying precision. The final act of this story would reveal even more horror, and with it, questions that to this day remain unanswered. When the sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, the Johnsons' front door stood open. A neighbor walking her dog was the first to notice. She thought it was strange, but harmless at first. Maybe someone had gone out early to grab the newspaper or taken the trash bins. But when she saw the door still ajar minutes later, she hesitated, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. She called the police, a decision that would lead to the discovery of one of the most disturbing crime scenes in the town's history. Inside, the air was heavy, still, and suffocating. Officers entered cautiously, unsure what they would find. The living room looked like the remnants of an ordinary sleepover, pillows scattered, blankets piled, snack bags left open. But then they noticed the silence, the unnatural stillness, and the absence of voices that should have filled the home. One by one, the bodies were found. The Johnson parents were discovered upstairs in their bedroom, victims of a swift and calculated attack. Their deaths were silent enough that no neighbors had heard a thing. Downstairs, the 4 girls were located in the living room. The chaos told its own story, signs of panic, of struggle, of an escape attempt cut short. Yet what shocked investigators most wasn't only the brutality of the crime, but the chilling detail that the youngest child of the family was left completely unharmed. He was sitting on his bed when officers opened the door. Dazed, confused, and silent, he couldn't explain what had happened. He only whispered that a man had walked into his room, looked at him for a long moment, and then left without a word. That detail disturbed detectives more than anything else. The intruder had spared him, intentionally. Why? Was it pity, a mistake, or something more sinister? The search of the house revealed disturbing evidence that turned the mystery into something even darker. In the attic, officers found a hidden box filled with photographs of the Johnson family. They weren't ordinary pictures either. Some were taken from a distance through windows, across the street, from places that suggested the stalker had been watching them for months. Others were even more unsettling, snapped from inside the house at odd angles, as if someone had entered before, moving through their private spaces while they slept. This discovery proved the crime wasn't random. The Johnson family had been chosen, targeted, and studied. Whoever committed the murders knew the house inside and out. He knew where to cut the power. He knew how to jam the locks. He knew how to move silently enough to avoid waking the children until it was too late. This wasn't an impulsive act of violence. It was something planned, rehearsed, and carried out with chilling precision. The community was left in shock. Families who once felt safe in their unlocked homes suddenly added security systems and floodlights. Parents refused to let their children spend nights at friends' houses. Fear spread like wildfire, fueled by the fact that the killer was never caught. Despite fingerprints, footprints, and the photographs, no match was ever found. Whoever had done this had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions behind. Some investigators theorized that the intruder had been someone close to the family, someone who blended into their lives without raising suspicion. Others argued he was a drifter who chose them at random, only to move on to another town. But then there were those who pointed to the boy's survival. The choice to leave him alive suggested something more personal, something deliberate. Maybe the killer wanted someone to remember. Maybe he wanted his story told. Over the years, theories have multiplied. Some believe the killer still lives in the area, hiding in plain sight. Others think he died long ago, taking his secrets with him. True crime followers continue to debate the case online, dissecting every detail, every clue, trying to uncover the truth behind one of the most haunting massacres the town has ever seen. The Johnson house was eventually sold, remodeled, and lived in again, but whispers still surround it. Neighbors claim to see shadows moving behind the curtains when no one is home. Others swear the sound of footsteps echoes faintly at night, as if the house itself remembers. Whether or not those stories are true, the legacy of that night remains. It's not just a tale of violence, it's a reminder of how fragile the feeling of safety can be. So what do you think really happened? Was this the work of a stranger who carefully chose his victims? Or was it someone the Johnsons already knew, someone hiding in their lives all along? Share your theories in the comments below. And if stories like this unsettle you, but also keep you coming back for more, make sure to like and subscribe, because the world is full of mysteries that remain unsolved. Then some of them may be closer than you think.